Alvin Ailey was an African-American choreographer whose unique style influenced modern dance. He was born on January 5, 1931, in Roger, Texas, into a period in American history of racial segregation, violence, and assassination of African Americans. His early childhood was very hard, with his father abandoning the family when Ailey was only 6 months old. He was then faced with the trauma of having his mother raped by a group of white men, which instilled a fear of white men within him. His formal training and love for dance began when he joined a dance school by Lester Horton, who in his later years became a mentor for Ailey. In 1958, Ailey went on to found his own dance company called the Alvin Ailey Dance Company, with his aim being to carry out his vision of a company dedicated to enriching the American modern dance heritage and preserving the uniqueness of the African American cultural experience. He has received a number of awards for his work that he has done, including the Kennedy Center Honor, in which he received in 1998 for his extraordinary contribution to American culture. Ailey also received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in recognition of his contributions and commitment to civil rights and dance in America. The choreographer, Alvin Ailey, effectively uses the manipulation of action, spatial elements, and non-movement components throughout the piece to clearly convey the emotional journey of African American women suffering through extraordinary hardships and finding ecstatic joy in finding freedom. His piece Cry not only conveys his choreographical intent, but is also a classic example of Ailey's unique modern style and his influence on modern dance. Throughout the piece Cry, Alvin Ailey has used a number of different action components to effectively convey his choreographical intent. A prominent movement used in the first section is the dancer stepping forward with a minor body roll whilst holding her arms out carrying a cloth. This is a representation of a woman serving as a slave. She then lays down the cloth and performs a number of repetitive movements such as throwing the cloth sideways, smoothing it out, and reaching her arms over her head. These repeated movements are a representation of the day-to-day chores that would have been performed repetitively each day. Within the first section, the dancer performs the movement of being on her knees and moving the cloth forward and backwards, which is clearly depicting her scrubbing the floors. All of the action components effectively convey her life and degree. This concept of slavery relates to the African American slave trade and the poor treatment that the people involved would have undergone. It is also pulled from Ailey's real-life experiences with his own African-American mother suffering from poor treatment for her skin color. Ailey's mother was mistreated because of her skin color and put through the unfair treatment of working hard jobs with little pay. Expressing real-life experiences through his work is one of Ailey's largest contributions to modern dance, as it takes the emotions of the piece to the next level, connecting with the audiences as they understand what has happened in real life. Halvard Steen stated, Ailey's biggest contributions were that the way he merged popular dance styles and the experiences and beliefs of black people. Throughout the first section, Ailey has used a combination of action movements that show the woman's strength and pride mixed with moments of pain and sorrow. Movements that show her pride and strength include how she carries her body in sections, the lifting of her head to the audience having her chin up, and when she bends her elbows, putting them behind her body and lifting up her skirt. The contrasting movements that show pain and sorrow include the dancer falling to her knees, crawling on the ground, holding her hands on her stomach, and using a number of contractions. The combination of these movements convey that even though she is faced with oppression and the emotions that comes with this, she still has the pride in herself and the want to break free, which shows the African American spirit. Ailey conveyed this spirit within the dancer because he himself, being African American, has pride in his own culture and wants to depict to audiences the fighting pride that the woman going through suffering would have had. This clever element of bringing his own culture into the dance piece is another one of Ailey's influences on modern dance. These movements of pain and sorrow then become prominent in the second section to further convey the emotions of the life that the woman is living. In the next section, it is evident that Ailey has incorporated a number of reaching out movements, including an elongated arabesque with the front arm reaching out, both arms reaching towards the ceiling, and having both arms stretched out to either side. These movements are all representing the woman trying to break free from oppression and find freedom. This conveys the choreographical intent, showing the emotional journey of the woman's want and fight for freedom. The motif that has been manipulated by Ailey is the crossing of the dancer's wrists above her head. This is a clear representation of the woman's hands being bound, and this represents the restraints placed on her and her lack of freedom. At the end of the section, she finishes with her hands crossed. However, in the second section, she doesn't finish with her hands crossed, which shows that the bounds have now been broken and that she is set free. This conveys the journey that the African Americans took to finally find freedom. This concept of African American slavery is an issue that would have been well known in American society. Therefore, Ailey was able to connect to the personal emotions that the audience members would have had towards the issue. His ability to connect with the audiences was one of his influences on modern dance. As the New York Times stated, he believed that dance could and should reach everybody. The non-moving components of props, costumes, and oral elements are used to further convey Ailey's choreographical intent. The only prop that is used within the dance is a long white cloth, which is manipulated in a number of different movements by the dancer. In the first section, the dancer wraps the cloth around her head, and this is a representation of the traditional African American headscarf that would have been worn by the woman in their society. Ailey has used this component to further convey the cultural background of the woman who suffered this harsh treatment, showing how they were African American. The white cloth is also used in conjunction with action components and can be seen as being symbolic of the restrictions placed on her. The dancer stands on the cloth and wraps the top section around her shoulders. She then performs the movement of her arms, pulling it tightly around her body. This depicts her being bound to the floor, and this shows her lack of freedom as her body is confined within the cloth. This is further conveying Ailey's intent of the emotional journey of these women suffering from oppression, and in particular the restrictions placed upon them. Ailey would have seen these restrictions and lack of freedom on his mother as he grew up, therefore displayed these emotions through the dance piece. The oral elements are a key aspect in the dance work cry, as they help to define the emotions and intent of each specific section. The music used in the second section is called Been on a Train by Laura Nyro, and this music starts with portraying the feeling of pain and sorrow with its slow tempo and calm lyrics. The music then begins to crescendo, becoming more intense, building up to the point where there is a loud scream in the music. This scream is a representation of all of the emotional frustration and anger felt by the woman, and therefore the many women that went through these hardships. The lyrics of the piece also help to further develop the piece, stating, "Been on a train, and I'm never going to be the same." Within these lyrics, the train is a clear representation of the journey of emotional pain and sorrow that the African American slaves suffered. This then relates to how once a woman has been a slave, she will never be the same, as she is left with the emotional traumas of what she has had to face. This helps Ailey convey the effects that the slave trade had on the society of African American women, not only when the issue was happening, but after it ended. This manipulation of oral elements is a further demonstration of how Ailey was able to connect with the audiences using their own emotions. The third section of the piece has contrasting music to the other two sections, with a dramatic change in tempo and uplifting rhythm. This music depicts that the woman has found freedom and is able to break free from the hardships of slavery. This is further conveying Ailey's intent to show the journey from hardships to ecstatic joy. The music itself is African American gospel music, which depicts the aspect of religion, tying in with several praying movements. This conveys Ailey's intent, showing the spiritual and faithful of himself and his mothers, as well as relating to the African American women everywhere. This connection to spirituality within the dance work is another one of Ailey's influences on modern dance, as it has been further developed in other pieces after Cry. Spatial elements is how the dancer moves through the space provided, including the shape, size, levels, and directions. Alvin Ailey has used spatial elements within Cry to further convey his choreographical intent, putting deeper meaning behind the piece. A spatial element that is used within the first section is levels, with the dancer performing a lot of floor work, including kneeling to the ground, sitting on the floor, and travelling across the ground on her knees. This conveys the level that African Americans were seen in the society during the time, being put below everybody else purely based on their skin colour. This conveys Ailey's intent of the harsh and unfair treatment that the African American women suffered. Her movements not filling up the space. However, as the dance progresses, her movements become increasingly larger. As in the third section, she begins to travel freely around the whole stage and using a large range of free movements. This conveys how she has now broken free and no longer has all the restrictions placed on her. This conveys Ailey's intent that the woman feels ecstatic joy in finding her freedom. Having pride in his culture would mean that he would want and be proud of these African American women breaking free. Therefore, he depicted this through the dance work. Altogether, he brings the audience on this woman's hard and emotional journey. Through watching her pain and sorrow, the audience falls in love with her and wants to see her become free and joyful. His ability to make the audience fall in love with the dancer and follow her story is one of the main influences he had on modern dance. Quoted, "One of Ailey's contributions to modern dance is a huge and dance-loving audience." When discussing the dance components of action, non-movement components, and spatial elements in Cry, it is evidently clear that Alvin Ailey has effectively used manipulation of these to convey the journey of African American women, showing their hardships, restrictions, suffering from oppression, and finally the joy they find in gaining freedom. Through his choreographical intent, he was able to create a piece that shows his influence on modern dance, as stated in his review in the New York Times for Cry. His accomplishments have a astounding impact on modern dance today.